Picture this: you're standing in a bustling medieval town square, surrounded by merchants hawking their wares, children darting through the crowd, and the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Suddenly, a trumpet blares, and all eyes turn to a brightly painted wagon rolling into the center of the commotion. A troupe of actors leaps down, unfurling colorful banners and assembling a simple stage right before your eyes. Within minutes, the air crackles with energy as they begin performing not just tales of kings and dragons, but shocking accounts of recent battles, scandals in distant courts, and even rumors of plagues creeping toward the town gates. This was how news traveled in an age before headlines or hashtags, where the most vital information came alive through the voices and gestures of performers. These traveling theaters were more than entertainment. They were the beating heart of public discourse, transforming town squares into breaking news hubs where every performance could shift the mood of an entire community. Think about how we consume news today, scrolling through feeds, skimming articles, maybe catching a quick video clip. Now rewind 700 years to a time when information moved at the speed of a horse-drawn wagon. Without newspapers or broadcasts, how did people learn about the world beyond their village? The answer lies in these roving bands of storytellers who mastered the art of wrapping truth in spectacle. They didn't just recite events, they dramatized them, turning dry reports into gripping narratives complete with heroes, villains, and cliffhangers. A local lord's tax decree might become a tragic tale of greed, while news of a royal wedding could explode into a romantic epic, complete with stolen glances and daring escapes. Audiences didn't just hear the news, they felt it, debated it, and carried it home like embers ready to spark conversation in taverns and market stalls. What's truly remarkable is how these performances shaped the course of history. A well-staged play could turn public opinion against a tyrant, stir support for a rebellion, or even spread revolutionary ideas across borders. Kings and clergy alike feared the power of these troops, sometimes banning them outright, while clever rulers used them as propaganda tools. And just like today's viral trends, the most gripping stories spread like wildfire, adapted and embellished by each troupe that carried them to the next town. So how did these theaters operate? Who were the actors behind the masks, and what tricks did they use to captivate crowds night after night? Stick around, because we're about to pull back the curtain on one of history's most fascinating and influential forms of mass communication. By the end of this journey, you'll never look at a news headline or a stage play the same way again. The story of these traveling theaters begins with lone performers, minstrels strumming lutes in smoky taverns, jesters tumbling through castle courtyards to make nobles laugh. By the 12th century, these solo acts had grown into something far more sophisticated. Enter the first organized troops, often funded by wealthy patrons who understood the power of a well-told story. Picture a noble family hiring actors not just for amusement, but to subtly promote their political agenda during performances, or a merchant's guild commissioning plays that glorified their trade, weaving their products into the plot like early product placement. These sponsorships gave troops stability, allowing them to travel farther and craft more elaborate shows. What set these performers apart was their genius for adaptation. A play about a famous battle might change drastically depending on the audience, toned down in regions loyal to the losing side, or embellished with heroic details near the victor's lands. They absorbed local gossip like sponges, weaving fresh scandals or triumphs into their scripts overnight. Imagine a troupe arriving in a town where the mayor had just raised taxes. By sundown, they'd be performing a satire featuring a bumbling, tax-obsessed villain who bore a suspicious resemblance to the real official. This nimbleness made them irresistible part journalists, part comedians, all masters of reading a crowd. Their secret weapon, accessibility. In a world where most couldn't read a royal decree even if it was nailed to the church door, these actors translated complex events into something visceral. A peasant might not understand Latin legal terms, but they'd grasp the meaning when an actor in bishop's robes demanded coins from a trembling farmer. The plays weren't just watched, they were experienced. Villagers hissed at corrupt officials played by actors, cheered for martyrs, and gasped at revelations about distant wars. This emotional connection made the messages stick. Long after the wagons rolled away, audiences would replay the scenes in their minds, discussing them over ale or at the mill. Yet their influence went deeper than local gossip. Some troops became de facto diplomats, carrying cultural customs across borders. A French dance sequence might appear in a German play the following season, while Italian comic tropes popped up in English performances. They were the medieval equivalent of algorithm-free social media, a human network spreading ideas at the speed of hoofbeats. And just like modern platforms, their power made authorities nervous. When a play mocking the Pope's latest edict went viral in wagon terms, you can bet someone in Rome took notice. That tension between the liberating spread of ideas and those who sought to control them would shape these theaters' wild, unpredictable journey through history. Life on the road for a traveling troupe was equal parts adventure and endurance. These weren't just performers, they were a self-contained village on wheels, each member juggling multiple roles to keep the show alive. The master player, often a veteran actor with decades of experience, served as director, diplomat, and sometimes even debt collector when payments from stingy town officials ran late. Under their leadership, every troupe member had a specialty. The tragedian, with his booming voice and flair for drama, might double as the group's scribe, hastily rewriting scripts by firelight to include that morning's gossip. The comedian, quick with a jest and quicker with a pratfall, could also barter for supplies at markets using nothing but charades when languages failed. Even the youngest apprentices had jobs, from stitching torn costumes to calming the skittish horses that pulled their creaking wagons through muddy roads. Their survival depended on two things, mobility and versatility. Those wagons weren't just transport, they were treasure chests of illusion. Foldable wooden stages, painted backdrops that could flip from a castle to a forest in seconds, and trunks stuffed with costumes that transformed a grizzled actor into a queen, a beggar, or the devil himself with just a change of hats and accents. When a troupe rolled into town, they could assemble their entire world in the time it took a baker to pull a loaf from the oven. No space was too challenging. An inn's courtyard became a royal court. A farmer's cart turned into a pirate ship, and the flickering light of torches masked rough seams in their makeshift sets. Audiences were just as varied as the stages. A single performance might draw fishmongers elbowing for a view up front, while wealthy merchants watched from upper windows, tossing coins when a line particularly pleased them. Plays had to work for everyone, layered with lowbrow humor for the crowds and subtle political jabs for the educated elites. This balancing act required razor-sharp instincts. One wrong move, say mocking a local official whose cousin was in attendance, could mean cancelled payments or even driven out of town by an angry mob. But when they read the room perfectly, the rewards went beyond coins. A well-received play could earn them invitations to perform at private estates, where noble patrons might offer warm beds, lavish meals, and most precious of all, protection for the next leg of their journey. And then there were the plays themselves, the beating heart of their craft. These weren't stale repetitions of the same old stories. Like modern journalists chasing a scoop, troops raced to be the first to dramatize breaking events. A messenger arriving with news of a distant battle might find himself cornered by actors hungry for details to spin into that night's performance. The plays became living newspapers, blending fact with just enough fiction to dodge accusations of sedition. A king's military defeat might be framed as an ancient Greek tragedy, or a church scandal reimagined as a fable about a wolf in shepherd's clothing. The genius was in the framing audiences left convinced they'd uncovered the truth themselves, not realizing how deftly the actors had shaped their understanding. What's astonishing is how little has changed in the art of persuasion. Today's viral news clips and satirical late night shows owe much to those medieval performers who understood that to inform is one thing, but to entertain while informing. That's power. The troops didn't just report history, they weaponized storytelling, turning the flickering light of their stages into a torch that could ignite revolutions or soothe unrest, all depending on who held the script. And as we'll soon see, that power didn't go unnoticed by the people who ruled the world beyond the stage. Imagine living in a world where your only window into distant wars, royal betrayals, or even local scandals wasn't a newspaper or a screen, but a group of actors turning reality into riveting drama. These medieval performers didn't just entertain, they decoded the world for audiences hungry for news. When word spread of a battle lost or a king's secret marriage, troops raced to stitch the facts into plays, often performing them within days of the events unfolding. A messenger's dry report about a border skirmish could become an epic showdown onstage, complete with clashing swords and stirring monologues about honor. And just like today's news outlets competing for eyeballs, rival troops would spin the same event differently. One might paint the defeated general as a coward, while another transformed him into a tragic hero, depending on who was funding their wagon. Satire was their sharpest tool. With a wink and an exaggerated mannerism, an actor dressed as a bishop could mock church corruption without ever naming names, leaving the audience to connect the dots. A play about greedy tax collectors might feature a villain with the same distinctive limp as the local magistrate, sending the crowd into roaring laughter and silently reinforcing their resentment. Authorities walked a fine line. Cracking down too hard risked turning performers into martyrs, while ignoring them let dissent spread. Some rulers tried to control the narrative by hiring troops to stage pro-government plays, but audiences weren't fooled. They could sniff out propaganda as easily as we spot clickbait today, and a heavy-handed performance might earn boos instead of cheers. The blur between fact and fiction was where these troops truly thrived. A scandal involving a nobleman's stolen jewels might inspire a play about a fox outsmarting a vain peacock, close enough for the crowd to recognize the real-life parallels, but distant enough to avoid retaliation. This delicate dance of implication made every performance a high-wire act. Get it right, and the troupe could sway public opinion. Get it wrong, and they might flee town by midnight with torches at their backs. Yet even the wildest embellishments carried kernels of truth. When actors claimed a distant plague turned rivers to blood, terrified listeners might not realize the river was a metaphor for trade routes choked with quarantine barriers. The stories stuck because they tapped into real fears and hopes, wrapped in the irresistible thrill of live performance. What's fascinating is how these plays functioned as early fact-checking networks. If a troupe's version of events strayed too far from what audiences knew to be true, word would spread and their credibility crumbled. The best troupes cultivated reputations for reliability, mixing verified details with just enough flair to keep crowds hooked. They were the medieval equivalent of trusted news anchors, except instead of a desk and a teleprompter, they had handmade masks and a talent for improvisation. And just like modern media, their influence could topple reputations or crown heroes, proving that the power of a well-told story hasn't diminished in 700 years, only the stages have changed. Religion and traveling theatre shared a bond as tangled as the vines carving through medieval cathedral walls, sometimes nurturing, sometimes strangling. In the beginning, the church was the stage's greatest champion. Picture a time when most couldn't read the Bible's Latin verses, and sermons alone couldn't capture wandering attention. Enter mystery plays, vivid reenactments of Noah's Ark bobbing on makeshift waves, or Adam and Eve's fall portrayed with apple props and a hissing serpent puppet. These performances turned abstract scripture into something you could see: the floodwaters rising, the prodigal son's ragged return. Villagers who dozed through homilies would weep as actors playing martyrs faced imaginary flames, or cheer when David toppled Goliath with a slingshot made from a tanner's leather strap. The church didn't just tolerate these dramas, they funded them, weaving doctrine into dialogue so seamlessly that audiences absorbed theology without realizing they'd been taught. But as troops grew bolder, the partnership frayed. A morality play about heaven and hell might share a wagon with a raucous farce mocking greedy monks, or a thinly veiled satire about a bishop's scandalous love letters. Suddenly, the same stages that had glorified saints became platforms for subversion. Some clergy recoiled, branding actors as vagabonds corrupting public morals. A French monk's diary from the 1400s seethes about performers who twist the devil's tales into laughter, while a Venetian cardinal band plays within sight of his cathedral, fearing their heathenish clamor would drown out prayers. Yet others in the church recognized what the best troops had always known: a crowd that laughs at a joke about a gluttonous priest might still file into confession afterward. Clever bishops hired actors to stage anti-heresy plays, turning the enemy into a strawman villain audiences loved to boo. The real tension lay in control. A church could commission a play about the evils of witchcraft, only to see the same troupe perform it next month with added scenes mocking the local inquisitor's thick accent. Religious authorities tried to leash these creative hounds, with censorship requiring scripts to be approved, banning female actors whose presence was deemed riotous, even excommunicating entire troupes. But the road was a lawless place. A play trimmed to satisfy one town's abbot might regrow its banned scenes by the next village, where the clergy winked at mischief. This dance of power and rebellion birthed some of history's most cunning storytelling tricks. When a troupe in Ghent was forbidden from portraying the Virgin Mary directly, they staged her as a glowing silhouette behind a linen screen, a workaround so beautiful it became tradition. What's striking is how these conflicts mirror modern debates about art and morality. The medieval church feared actors the way some today fear influencers or comedians, not because they lied, but because they revealed truths with a smirk instead of a sermon. Yet even the fiercest critics couldn't deny theatre's grip on hearts. When a plague struck Milan in 1502, the archbishop, who'd once called plays the devil's gossip, begged troops to perform uplifting stories, hoping to quell panic. It was the ultimate irony. The institution that distrusted these storytellers needed their magic in the darkest hours. This push and pull shaped everything from carnival traditions to the very structure of plays, leaving a legacy that still echoes in how faith and entertainment collide or collaborate today. As the church's grip on culture wavered, another force emerged to vie for control of the stage: kings and councils who saw not sin in these performances, but something far more dangerous: the power to stir crowds toward rebellion or loyalty with nothing but a well-timed line. And where religion had wielded scripture as a censor, political rulers would reach for sharper tools: laws, spies, and in some cases, the executioner's axe. Power rarely tolerates a stage it doesn't control, and medieval rulers were no exception. Kings who once dismissed actors as mere jesters soon woke to a terrifying truth: a well-staged play could rouse a mob faster than any tax collector's demand. The smartest monarchs didn't fight this influence, they weaponized it. Picture a troupe arriving at a castle, not to entertain, but to rehearse a new script commissioned by the crown. A play where the king's latest military blunder became a heroic sacrifice, or his rival's ambition twisted into treasonous scheming. These weren't just stories, they were PR campaigns with lewd accompaniments. In 1520, the Duke of Milan paid a fortune to a traveling company to stage nightly performances depicting his enemy, the French king, as a bumbling glutton who napped through battles. The crowds ate it up literally in some cases, as vendors sold pastries shaped like the caricatured monarch for audiences to devour during the show. But where some rulers saw opportunity, others saw only danger. Censorship laws sprouted like weeds across Europe, demanding scripts be approved by local magistrates or church officials before a single line could be spoken. In England, the master of the revels held sweeping authority to slash seditious content from plays, while Spanish troops risked imprisonment if caught performing without a license stamped by the crown. The penalties were brutal. Actors in Prague had their tongues branded for mocking the emperor, and a Florentine troop leader was hanged after his satire about a corrupt banker hit too close to home. Yet for every law, performers invented a loophole. When a German prince banned political commentary outright, troops switched to biblical stories, casting his tax collectors as Pharisees and rebel leaders as David fighting Goliath. The message slid past censors wrapped in scripture. The real genius lay in their use of allegory. A play about a wicked lion terrorizing a forest might seem harmless until the audience noticed the lion's crest matched the king's coat of arms. Actors developed a secret language of gestures. A hat tilted just so could signal the character was a stand-in for the local bishop, while tossing a red apple into the crowd might hint at a notorious cardinal scandal. These coded performances turned theaters into intellectual puzzles, where decoding the hidden meaning became part of the fun. Authorities often caught on too late, like the Venetian governor who applauded a fable about a thieving magpie, only to realize days later the bird's stolen trinkets mirrored his own embezzled treasures. This dance of suppression and subversion reached fever pitch during rebellions. In the weeks before the Peasants' War, traveling troops in Germany staged cryptic plays about shepherds overthrowing wolves, priming crowds for uprising without ever uttering a treasonous word. Afterward, paranoid lords banned all performances for miles around, only for actors to resurface as harmless puppeteers, their wooden kings and rebels nodding along to rhymes that just happened to rhyme with revolutionary slogans. The troops' ability to adapt was their salvation. When scripts were confiscated, they relied on improvisation. When stages were barred, they performed in code. And when all else failed, they simply packed their wagons and rolled toward friendlier crowds, leaving baffled officials clutching outdated scripts like missed warnings. What's remarkable is how these struggles mirror modern battles over free speech and propaganda. The tools have changed: algorithms instead of allegories, viral videos instead of wagon stages. But the core tension remains. Those in power will always fear the storytellers, because stories don't just reflect the world, they have the power to reshape it. And as we'll see next, this wasn't just about politics, it was also about cold, hard coin. The economic engine behind these traveling theaters was as complex as any royal treasury. with profits and risks that could make or break a troupe in the blink of a curtain call. Behind every rousing performance and every cleverly coded political allegory, there lay a far less glamorous reality: the constant scramble for coin. Running a traveling theater troupe was like operating a small, mobile business where success depended as much on financial savvy as on acting chops. Take the cost of those elaborate costumes alone. Silk for a queen's gown might cost more than a farmer earned in a year, while armor made of painted leather had to withstand countless performances without fraying. Then there were the wagons, custom-built with hidden compartments for collapsing stages, often pulled by horses that needed feed and shoeing. Even ink for rewriting scripts was a recurring expense, as troupes updated material to reflect the latest scandals or battles. Funding this nomadic enterprise required a patchwork of income streams, each with its own risks and rewards. At the top of the hierarchy were noble patrons who bankrolled troops in exchange for flattering portrayals or private performances. A duke might fund a company for an entire season just to ensure they staged plays depicting his family's lineage as heroic. But patronage was a fickle safety net. Fall out of favor with your sponsor, and the money vanished overnight. More reliable were the public collections, where actors passed a hat or wooden bowl after performances. The trick was timing. End the show on a high note, and coins would rain down. Misjudge the crowd's mood, and you might cover barely the cost of that night's bread. The smartest troupes diversified like modern startups. They sold chapbooks, cheaply printed scripts or song lyrics, to literate audience members who wanted to relive the performance. Some offered premium experiences. For an extra coin, you could meet the actors backstage or even suggest plot twists for future shows. Others bartered skills, repairing costumes in exchange for a blacksmith's repairs to their wagon axle. But the real moneymakers were the commissioned works. A merchant's guild might pay handsomely for a play glorifying their trade, while a town council hired troops to stage morality plays during festivals. These gigs came with strict creative constraints, but they kept the wheels turning literally. Financial pressure shaped artistry in ways audiences never saw. A troupe might stretch a single versatile actor across 3 roles, swapping hats and accents, because hiring another player meant splitting scarce profits. Popular but tired comedies stayed in rotation longer than anyone liked, simply because they guaranteed laughter and donations. And when funds ran dangerously low, even the proudest companies resorted to crowd-pleasing stunts, acrobatics between scenes, or the old trick of having the devil character vanish in a puff of smoke, really just a well-timed torch snuffing. Survival sometimes meant sacrificing subtlety for spectacle, yet the most successful troupes turned these constraints into creative fuel. The famed Compagnia della Calza of Venice, active in the late 1400s, famously staged an entire play using just 4 actors and a single backdrop painted differently on each side, a masterpiece of frugal ingenuity. Their secret: they invested where it counted, in razor-sharp satire that had nobles and peasants alike lining up for repeat viewings. Meanwhile, the German-English Komödianten troupe built a financial model so robust they could afford lavish props, like a working fountain for a scene set in Rome, because they'd negotiated a percentage of tavern sales during their performances. Where others saw hardship, they spotted opportunity. This delicate dance between commerce and art left an enduring legacy. The troupes that thrived weren't always the most talented. They were the ones who understood that every performance was both a story and a transaction. And just as today's streaming platforms analyze viewer data to greenlight shows, medieval actors adapted based on what made the hat heavier: the difference. When a modern series flops, it's cancelled. When a medieval play bombed, the troupe might go hungry, or worse, become the subject of another company's satire about starving artists. That relentless pressure to entertain or perish forged a breed of performers who could make audiences laugh, cry, and most importantly, reach for their purses, a skill no algorithm could ever replicate. Among the constellation of traveling troupes, few shone as brightly as Italy's Commedia dell'arte companies, the rock stars of Renaissance theatre. Picture a troupe like the Gelosi, founded in the 1560s, whose name literally meant the zealous, and for good reason. They didn't just perform, they electrified crowds with a riotous blend of acrobatics, improvised wit, and stock characters so vivid they became cultural icons. Audiences from Venice to Paris would instantly recognize the pompous Pantalone with his hooked nose and tight purse strings, or the sly servant Arlecchino, whose diamond-patterned costume still inspires Halloween costumes today. What set these troupes apart was their razor-sharp improvisation. Actors worked from loose scenarios, spinning fresh jokes around local scandals on the fly. A merchant's failed deal in Milan might become a running gag by nightfall, with the troupe's quick-witted zany character milking it for laughs all the way to Naples. Crossing the Alps into England, a different kind of theatrical royalty reigned, the Queen's Men. Handpicked by Elizabeth I herself in 1583, this all-star ensemble wasn't just entertaining the crown, they were political operatives in motley. Their plays, like the famous victories of Henry V, didn't just recount history, they crafted a narrative of English glory that bolstered Elizabeth's reign. With privileges including legal protection and first pick of London's finest actors, they toured the countryside in wagons painted with the royal crest, their performances doubling as loyalty propaganda. Imagine the impact when they staged a play justifying Tudor rule in a rebellious northern town theatre as soft power, long before the term existed, yet fame came at a price. The most celebrated troupes faced relentless pressure to outdo themselves. When the Italian troupe Confidenti arrived in Paris after years of hype, their opening show had to include a real tightrope walker and a fire-breathing devil just to meet expectations. Meanwhile, the English Admiral's Men, rivals to the Queen's Men, sparked bidding wars between cities by teasing exclusive new plays only to reveal they'd recycled plots with fresh titles. The medieval equivalent of clickbait, perhaps, but it kept coins clinking into their coffers. Regional styles emerged like theatrical dialects. German Meistersinger troupes blended music and morality tales, their harmonies turning town squares into makeshift cathedrals. Spanish autos sacramentales wrapped religious themes in lavish spectacle, with stage machinery that made angels ascend on hidden pulleys. In France, the farce-loving Enfant Sans Souci troupe perfected the art of political roast comedy, their jabs at the nobility so precise that kings sometimes paid them not to perform certain skits. Each style reflected its homeland. Italian troupes mirrored the peninsula's competitive city-states with their rival companies, while English plays echoed the island's growing national identity. What's astonishing is how these troupes became medieval influencers, spreading trends faster than any merchant caravan. A commedia bit about Venetian fashions might inspire hat styles in Lyon by next season. The Queen's Men's portrayal of chivalry set off a craze for jousting tournaments among England's middle class. Actors weren't just performers, they were tastemakers, their costumes copied by tailors and their catchphrases peppering tavern talk. And just like today's celebrities, their personal lives fueled gossip. When famed commedia actress Isabella Andreini died in childbirth, thousands mourned as if royalty had fallen, while pamphlets speculated wildly about which nobleman fathered her child. Behind the glitter, though, lay grit. Star actors often trained from childhood, apprenticing under masters who demanded perfection. A commedia performer might spend years perfecting the exact tilt of a masked head to convey lust or rage without words. English tragedians studied swordplay not for stage combat, but because real fights erupted if audiences felt cheated by fake swings. The brightest stars could demand high wages. Records show one lead actor earning enough to buy a country estate, but most lived hand to mouth, their fame as fragile as the wooden stages they toured. When plague or war closed cities, even legends scrambled for scraps. This patchwork of regional styles and star power didn't just entertain, it laid the groundwork for modern theater. The comedia's improvised comedy birthed sitcoms' rapid-fire wit, while the Queen's Men's historical dramas evolved into prestige TV epics. Their greatest legacy, though, was proving that stories could transcend borders long before streaming made it effortless. A troupe's wagon might take months to traverse Europe, but their ideas flew ahead on the lips of merchants, pilgrims, and anyone who'd ever gasped at a plot twist or hummed a catchy troubadour tune. And as we'll see next, the stages they built, from hay bales to royal halls, were as ingenious as the performances themselves. Crossing into France, traveling troupes mastered the art of the farce ribald comedies where cuckolded husbands and scheming servants brought roaring laughter to market squares. These weren't just crude jokes, they were social pressure valves, letting commoners laugh at the very hierarchies that constrained them. A typical plot might feature a clever peasant outwitting a dim-witted lord, with exaggerated accents and saucy double entendres that skirted outright rebellion. The key was plausible deniability. If authorities objected, actors could claim they were merely telling old tales, even as the audience caught every pointed reference to current grievances. French troupes also pioneered physical comedy. Think acrobats tumbling through scenes or pies, accidentally flung at characters resembling unpopular tax collectors. Meanwhile, German stages took a dramatically different tone. Here, religious dramas known as Passionspiel dominated, transforming biblical stories into sprawling, day-long spectacles. Picture entire towns participating, butchers playing Roman soldiers, local choir boys as angels suspended on rudimentary pulleys. The play's blended piety with pageantry. A scene of Christ's crucifixion might be followed by a comic interlude featuring bumbling devils, their red tights stuffed with straw to mock the underworld's impotence. This mix of solemnity and humor made theology feel immediate, tangible. In Oberammergau, a vow to perform the Passion Play every decade after surviving the plague in 1634 continues to this day, proof of how deeply these performances rooted themselves in community identity. Spain's autos sacramentales took religious theater to even grander heights, literally. Stages became three-tiered universes, heaven above with painted clouds, earth in the middle, and a trapdoor Hellmouth belching sulfur, actually burning hemp. But what truly set Spanish troupes apart was their integration of music and dance, flamenco rhythms underscoring morality tales, or processions of actors twirling to symbolize spiritual ascent. The famed actor-manager Lope de Ruda didn't just recite lines, he strummed a guitar between scenes, selling song sheets to audiences eager to recreate the magic at home. This multisensory approach turned performances into festivals where the line between spectator and participant blurred. Up in Scandinavia, sagas and folklore took center stage. Icelandic troupes adapted Viking tales with eerie realism, fireside recitations of Njol's saga punctuated by the clang of replica swords. Swedish performers used shadow puppetry to bring troll myths to life, their leather-cut monsters flickering against linen screens. These stories weren't mere entertainment, they were cultural preservation. In a region where harsh winters isolated villages for months, traveling players carried news and tradition, ensuring a shared identity across vast distances. A single performance might include a Danish ballad about star-crossed lovers, followed by updates on Norwegian fishing rights, history, and headlines woven together. What united these disparate styles was an uncanny knack for mirroring their audiences. Italian troupes in wealthy city-states crafted intricate political satires, while rural English players leaned into slapstick and ghost stories. Dutch performances, often centered on merchant dilemmas, stories about dishonest traders, resonated in Europe's busiest ports. This adaptability wasn't just artistic, it was economic. A troupe that could pivot from a Spanish court's refined musical to a Bavarian village's raucous beer hall show guaranteed survival. The smartest companies kept regional repertoires, a trunk of German scripts, a folder of French farces ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Yet beneath the variations lay a shared purpose. These stages were Europe's first true public forums, whether through a Spanish dancer's stomp echoing centuries of Moorish influence, or a German actor's solemn portrayal of Martin Luther's Stand at Worms. Performances distilled complex histories and conflicts into something visceral. A peasant might not understand Latin Mass, but when an actor playing greed in a morality play clutched fake coins while starving villagers groaned, the lesson hit home. This alchemy, turning abstract power structures into stories that stirred laughter, tears, or fury, made traveling theaters far more than diversions. They were the crucibles where public opinion was forged, one performance at a time. And forge it they did. When a French farce mocking tax collectors toured Burgundy in 1492, records show revenue dropped sharply in towns where it played, proof that laughter could loosen purse strings as effectively as any revolt. Meanwhile, German passion plays so inflamed anti-Semitic sentiments that some cities banned portrayals of Jewish characters, fearing violence. The stage didn't just reflect society, it held up a funhouse mirror that could distort, magnify, or expose truths too uncomfortable for plain speech. As we'll see next, this power didn't just shape opinions, it toppled governments, saved lives, and in some cases rewrote history itself. In the tightly knit fabric of medieval society, traveling theaters didn't just entertain, they stitched communities together. Imagine a village where neighbors rarely ventured beyond their fields, where news traveled slower than the changing seasons. Then, like a burst of color on a gray canvas, a troupe's wagons rolled in. Suddenly, the miller stood shoulder to shoulder with the Lord's steward, both craning their necks to see the same stage. For a few precious hours, social hierarchies blurred. A noble might wince at a joke mocking aristocracy alongside a cobbler's raucous laughter, while a merchant's wife and a dairymaid gasped in unison as the villain's plot unfolded. These performances became rare equalizers, where shared emotions, outrage at injustice, delight in wit, bridged divides that laws and customs enforced every other day of the year. The communal magic extended far beyond the final bow. Long after the actors packed their props, the plays lived on in village life. Tavern debates erupted over whether the hero's sacrifice was foolish or noble, while market vendors reenacted favorite scenes between haggling customers. In some towns, local artisans even adapted plot lines into seasonal festivals. A passion play's villain might reappear as a straw effigy burned at harvest, or a comedy's lovers inspire maypole rituals. This wasn't passive consumption, it was collective storytelling, with each retelling adding new layers to the original performance. Isolation melted under theater's warmth. Remote hamlets, starved for novelty, treated troupe visits like holidays. Records from the Swiss Alps describe villages pooling coins to lure players across treacherous mountain passes, while Scottish islanders lit bonfires along cliffs to guide ships carrying actors. The anticipation itself became ritual. Children memorized songs from previous visits, elders prepared feasts, and even rival families declared truces during performance days. In an era before radios or railways, these gatherings were lifelines to the wider world. offering not just news but the electric thrill of experiencing it together. Yet the most profound impact was subtler. Theatre taught communities how to think collectively. A play questioning authority might embolden serfs to petition for lower taxes, while a tragic tale of feuding families could cool local tensions. In Ghent, archives show how a 15th-century performance about corrupt judges preceded reforms in the town council, proof that stories didn't just reflect society, they rewired it. Even light-hearted farces had weight, using laughter to soften hardened attitudes. When a French troupe staged a skit about a bigoted innkeeper outsmarted by foreign travelers, locals later reported treating wandering merchants with newfound courtesy. This social alchemy didn't go unnoticed by those in power. Authorities who feared unsupervised gatherings allowed theatre precisely because it channeled communal energy into something they could monitor. A king might permit a satire mocking his tax policy if it meant peasants blew off steam through laughter rather than rebellion. But the troops knew their real power lay in the conversations sparked after the curtain fell, whispers in breadlines about justice, or a farmer's child asking why the play's hero shared his last loaf while the local baron hoarded grain. These quiet moments of reflection were where theatre's deepest revolutions took root. What's extraordinary is how these medieval dynamics foreshadowed modern social media. Like today's viral tweets or trending videos, traveling plays gave people shared cultural touchstones inside jokes, moral dilemmas, heroic archetypes that transcended literacy or class. The troupes were algorithm-free influencers, their stages the original platforms where ideas spread not through clicks, but through collective gasps and applause. And just as online discourse today shapes everything from fashion to politics, these performances subtly remolded the contours of daily life, proving that the stories a society tells itself are never just entertainment. They're the invisible hands that sculpt its values, fears, and dreams. As the medieval world inched toward the Renaissance, this communal storytelling tradition didn't fade, it evolved. The same techniques that made villagers weep over a morality play would soon breathe life into Shakespeare's groundlings, then ripple outward to shape theatre as we know it. The stages grew grander, the scripts more polished, but the heartbeat remained unchanged. People gathered in the dark, united by the glow of a story that made them see their world anew. The echoes of medieval traveling theatres hum through modern performance in ways we rarely stop to notice. Take the razor-sharp political satire of late-night comedy shows, those monologues skewering politicians with exaggerated impressions and witty one-liners. They're direct descendants of the troubadour who mocked a greedy lord with a puppet show 7 centuries ago. The tools have changed: teleprompters instead of hand-painted banners, viral clips replacing wagon stages, but the DNA remains identical. Wrap uncomfortable truths in laughter, and they'll slip past defenses to spark conversation. Even the targets are eerily similar. Where medieval actors used animal fables to critique clergy, today's comedians deploy memes and parody songs to lampoon modern power structures. Street performers keeping alive the tradition of spontaneous theatre are perhaps the most visible legacy. Watch a busker in Paris or New York transform a sidewalk into a stage with nothing but a hat for coins and a crowd's curiosity. That's the same raw energy that fueled medieval market squares. The best modern street acts still rely on those ancient tricks. Quick audience reads to adjust material, physical comedy that transcends language, and the alchemy of turning public space into shared experience. When a living statue makes a child gasp or a juggler turns dropped balls into a running gag, they're channeling the same improvisational genius that kept travelers' wagons rolling. Modern acting itself owes these troupes an unpayable debt. The improvisational techniques taught in drama schools today, method acting's emotional recall, the yes and rule of comedy improv, were survival skills for medieval performers. Without fixed scripts, they had to think on their feet, adapting to hecklers, changing political climates, or sudden rainstorms. That fluidity lives on in everything from Shakespearean actors handling audience interruptions to reality TV's unscripted moments. Even the concept of an actor playing multiple roles in one show stems from medieval practicality, when a troupe's lead might switch from king to clown to corpse, sometimes within the same scene. Theater's power to distill complex events into gripping narrative didn't fade with parchment and quills. It evolved. Docudramas like The Crown or Chernobyl follow the same blueprint as those wagon plays about royal scandals and distant disasters, blending fact with just enough fiction to make the medicine go down. News outlets now hire explainer artists to sketch stories live on whiteboards, unconsciously mirroring the medieval actor who used chalk on slate to diagram battle strategies mid-performance. The through line is undeniable. Humans crave stories that make sense of chaos, whether delivered by a troupe in motley or a Netflix algorithm. Touring productions keep the nomadic spirit blazing. Broadway hits now route global tours with military precision, but the essence carrying a portable world in trucks, winning over fresh crowds nightly, would feel familiar to a 15th century troupe leader. Even the economics parallel, then as now, a hit show could fund lean seasons, while a flop might strand actors penniless in a strange town, the biggest shift. Medieval troupes bribed border guards with performances. Today's companies navigate visa paperwork. Yet for all these continuities, misconceptions cling to these early performers like old stage dust. Were they really the lawless vagabonds some chroniclers painted? Did every performance drip with hidden rebellion? Unraveling these myths reveals a truth far more interesting, not just about them, but about why we still need their kind of magic in an age of digital overload. Think of the stereotypical medieval actor, a ragtag vagabond, shunned by polite society, performing crude jokes for scraps. Now toss that image aside because the reality was far more nuanced. While some performers did live on the fringes, many were respected craftsmen who treated their art with the same dedication as a blacksmith forging armor or a scribe illuminating manuscripts. Records from 15th century England show actors being paid handsomely by guilds to train apprentices in vocal projection and gesture, while Italian city-states granted certain troupes the same tax exemptions given to other skilled trades. The difference, where a carpenter's work lasted generations, an actor's masterpiece evaporated the moment the final line was spoken. The myth of crudeness collapses under scrutiny too. Surviving scripts reveal astonishing complexity, like The Castle of Perseverance, a 15th century morality play that maps human psychology through allegorical characters battling for a protagonist's soul. Its stage directions call for a circular set representing the cosmos, with towers for heaven, hell, and earthly temptations. This wasn't slapdash entertainment, it was philosophical theater disguised as spectacle. Even comedies layered wordplay so intricate that modern scholars debate whether certain lines were double entendres or triple. A French farce might seem like simple adultery humor until you notice the cuckolded husband's monologue mirrors contemporary debates about church indulgences, a joke that worked for groundlings and theologians alike. Religion's role has been similarly oversimplified. While biblical dramas were undeniably popular, they shared wagon space with subversive material. Consider The Feast of Fools, where lower clergy and actors collaborated on raucous festivals parodying liturgy itself, deacons singing off-key hymns, donkey processions replacing solemn rites. These weren't blasphemous rebellions but pressure valves, allowing controlled irreverence that ultimately reinforced social order. Meanwhile, secular plays explored shockingly modern themes. A Burgundian romance recovered in 2012 features a female protagonist who cross-dresses to become a knight, then debates gender roles with a friar, centuries before Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. What truly shatters stereotypes is the evidence of women's participation. Conventional wisdom claims acting was exclusively male until the Renaissance, but contracts and court records tell another story. In southern France, the jongleurs, female minstrels, were celebrated for their musical and theatrical skills, performing at noble courts as early as the 1200s. Italy's famed commedia dell'arte troupes included star actresses like Isabella Andreini, whose published poetry and letters reveal a shrewd businesswoman negotiating her own contracts. These women faced unique perils. Traveling troupes were sometimes accused of prostitution, but also wielded unique power. A skilled actress could earn enough to commission portraits or leave bequests to convents, blurring the line between artist and patron. The most resilient myth that these performances were mere diversions in a grim, unenlightened age. Unraveling that falsehood reveals something far more radical. Medieval audiences craving and creators delivering stories as layered and provocative as anything on modern stages. The difference lies not in sophistication but in survival. For every script preserved in some abbey's library, 100 more were lost to damp attics or the wear of constant travel. What remains is a trail of breadcrumbs suggesting a theatrical landscape richer than we ever imagined, one where laughter and critique, piety and subversion, weren't opposites but partners in the eternal dance of holding a mirror up to society. Women carved out space in the traveling theater world with a mix of artistry and sheer determination that defied the constraints of their time. While most stages were dominated by men, especially in regions where tradition barred women from public performance, Italy and Spain became unexpected havens for female performers. Take Vincenza Armoni, an Italian actress in the 1560s whose performances were so electrifying that scholars compared her to a comet streaking across the stage. She didn't just act, she designed costumes, composed music, and negotiated contracts with nobles, a rarity in an era when women's legal autonomy was razor-thin. Then there was Spain's Maria de Córdoba, known as La Baltasara, who stunned audiences by playing both male and female roles with equal conviction, her voice shifting effortlessly between a growling soldier and a heartbroken maiden. These women weren't anomalies, they were pioneers who proved the stage could be a space for reinvention. Behind the spotlight, women's labor kept entire troupes afloat. Wives and daughters of actors often served as seamstresses, stitching elaborate costumes from scavenged fabrics that had to withstand months of travel. Some became experts in disguise, crafting beards from horsehair or padding garments to transform slender boys into corpulent kings. Others took on the role of musicians, playing lutes or drums during performances, a subtle but vital presence that set the rhythm of every scene. In a world where women's work was often unpaid or invisible, these contributions were the hidden scaffolding that held productions together. Payroll records from a French troupe in 1498 list a Margot Labroduce earning wages equal to the male actors for her embroidery skills, suggesting that behind-the-scenes talent could command real respect. The risks these women faced were as dramatic as the roles they played. Travel exposed them to dangers from highway robbers to disapproving clergy, and their reputations balanced on a knife's edge. A performer like Isabella Andreini might be celebrated in one city as a muse, only to be denounced in the next as a harlot. Yet the very instability of theater life also offered unexpected freedoms. On the road, a talented actress could rise through merit rather than birth, her social status fluid as the characters she portrayed. Contracts from Venetian troops show women negotiating their own salaries and performance conditions, a level of autonomy unimaginable for most medieval women bound by domestic roles. Their presence subtly reshaped the stories told onstage. In all male troupes, female characters often became caricatures, shrill temptresses, or passive virgins. But when women like Isabella took the stage, they brought nuance to these roles, infusing heroines with wit and agency. A surviving commedia dell'arte scenario shows a female character outsmarting male rivals not through magic or brute force, but with sharp dialogue and psychological insight, a radical departure from the simplistic damsels of earlier morality plays. Even in religious dramas, actresses pushed boundaries. Spanish records mention a performance where a woman playing the Virgin Mary improvised lines advocating for compassion toward unwed mothers, sparking both controversy and quiet admiration among female spectators. What's often overlooked is how these performers became unwitting activists. Simply by occupying public space, they challenged notions of where women belonged. In 1483, a German chronicler fumed about a troupe where women spake as boldly as men, yea, on matters of state, suggesting that female actors didn't just recite lines, they shaped public discourse. Their influence trickled beyond the stage too. In Lyon, a guild of silk workers cited the fair wages paid to actresses when demanding better pay for their own female members, proof that theater could model new social possibilities. The legacy of these women echoes in modern debates about representation and equity in entertainment. They were the first to prove that stories gain depth when told through diverse voices, a lesson the creative industries are still relearning today. As we turn next to the combustible mix of politics and performance, remember, the same stages that let women defy expectations also became platforms for ideas that could topple thrones. These traveling troupes walked a razor's edge every time they unpacked their stages. What made them dangerous wasn't just their jokes, but their uncanny ability to make oppression visible. Take the infamous play of the Lord's Mill from 15th century Germany, where a greedy abbot demanding excessive tithes was portrayed as a miller grinding peasants into flour. The metaphor was so potent that church officials burned the script publicly, yet within weeks, variations surfaced in neighboring towns with the miller recast as a wolf or dragon, proving you can't silence an idea whose time has come. Authorities responded with escalating creativity. In Florence, actors were forced to perform with their backs to the audience if deemed too inflammatory, while French troops faced scripts pre-approved by royal censors who often missed the sly symbolism of a particular prop or gesture. The real genius lay in their evasion tactics. When Burgundy banned plays about taxation outright, troops switched to biblical stories casting tax collectors as the Pharisees who betrayed Judas. If clergy complained, actors could innocently claim they were just spreading gospel truths. Some developed secret signals. A red hat placed upside down might warn the troupe that spies were present, triggering improvised, safe scenes until the threat passed. The boldest troops used children as lookouts, their high-pitched voices singing coded lyrics when officials approached, giving actors moments to swap controversial scrolls for approved material. Physical staging became another weapon. A troupe in Ghent circumvented a ban on portraying living clergy by using shadow puppets, arguing they weren't actors but mere silhouettes. Others exploited jurisdictional gaps, performing on wagons parked exactly at town borders, so when one side's guards moved to arrest them, they'd roll the stage a few feet into another lord's territory. The most daring trick was that accidental performance actors would claim they were just rehearsing when crowds gathered, or that certain lines were misheard by overzealous listeners. Yet the stakes were terrifyingly real. Records from Nuremberg show an actor's tongue was nailed to the stage for mocking the emperor, while a Spanish troop leader was hanged after his satire about a corrupt judge hit too close to home. Remarkably, these punishments often backfired. Martyred performers became folk heroes, their band plays memorized and recited in taverns. After authorities in Lyon burned a wagon carrying seditious scripts, locals smuggled fragments from the ashes, stitching them into quilts passed between villages like revolutionary Samizdat. This cat-and-mouse game birthed theatrical techniques we still use today. The concept of plausible deniability in political humor, medieval actors perfected it. The practice of setting controversial stories in fictional kingdoms or historical periods to avoid censorship, their invention. Even modern improvs, yes, and rule traces back to performers who had to seamlessly incorporate sudden interruptions from authorities into their shows. When a sheriff once stormed a stage mid-performance to arrest the lead actor, the quick-thinking comedian threw an arm around him declaring, "Welcome, my villainous brother," turning the raid into a scripted plot twist that left the crowd cheering and the official too bewildered to act. What's astonishing is how these ancient battles mirror today's debates about free speech and cancel culture. The tools have changed: algorithms instead of royal edicts, shadow banning replacing the stocks, but the core conflict remains: who gets to control the stories that shape society's imagination? These medieval performers understood something we're still grappling with, that laughter can be revolutionary, that a well-timed metaphor can slip past defenses reason can't breach, and that the most dangerous art often wears the disguise of entertainment. Now let's pull back the curtain on how these same performers, when not dodging censors, held audiences spellbound with nothing but words, gestures, and raw stagecraft. Their bag of tricks was as sophisticated as any modern special effects team, proving that real magic doesn't require technology, just ingenuity and an unshakable belief in the power of a good story. Without microphones or spotlights, medieval actors turned their bodies into living amplifiers and their costumes into walking scenery. Every flick of the wrist, every booming syllable had to reach the back row of a crowded market square. No easy feat when competing with barking dogs and haggling merchants. They developed a precise physical vocabulary. A hand clutched to the chest signaled love, a staggered step meant drunkenness, and a sudden spin could transport the audience from a castle to a battlefield in seconds. These exaggerated motions weren't just practical, they became an art form. Records describe French actors who trained for years to perfect the exact tilt of a masked head that conveyed jealousy versus rage, or German performers whose footwork during death scenes drew gasps for its realism. Costumes were their Swiss Army knives of storytelling. A single wagon might carry just 3 trunks, but inside lay the makings of 100 characters. A reversible cloak, red silk on one side, tattered wool on the other, could toggle between nobility and beggar in a heartbeat. Helmets with removable plumes transformed soldiers into messengers, while a set of detachable sleeves let one actor play both a robed scholar and a bare-armed blacksmith. The real magic lay in hats. A tall conical headpiece marked a villain, a floppy berth signaled a fool, and swapping them mid-scene could flip a character's entire personality. Audiences didn't just recognize these visual shortcuts, they delighted in them, like modern fans spotting an actor's signature prop in a new role. Masks took this transformation further, especially in Italy's commedia dell'arte tradition. Half-face leather masks with exaggerated features, a hooked nose for greedy pantalone, sunken cheeks for the melancholic daughter, let actors switch between roles by simply turning their heads. But these weren't just quick change tools, they amplified emotion like living emojis. When an actor playing the trickster Arlecchino tilted his cat-like mask downward, the crowd saw mischief brewing. Tilt it up, and suddenly he was all innocence. The masks also freed actors to take risks anonymous behind leather and paint. They could satirize local bigwigs with impunity, knowing the mask's fixed grin took the blame. Props worked overtime in these stripped-down productions. A single wooden staff might become a king's scepter, a witch's broom, or the dividing line between warring kingdoms. The cleverest troupes used poor theater tricks centuries before the term existed. A bucket of water stood in for the sea, a ladder became a mountain, and a handful of tossed pebbles created the sound of hail. The sparse setups forced audiences to co-create the illusion. When an actor mimed pulling an invisible rope, the crowd collectively saw the bell tower he was supposedly scaling. This collaborative imagination made the experience more personal than any high-tech modern set ever could. Breaking the fourth wall wasn't just occasional, it was the lifeblood of performances. Actors might pause a battle scene to ask spectators who should win, or have the villain hide among the crowd, drawing nervous laughter as he overheard plans against him. In one surviving French script, the hero stops mid-soliloquy to borrow a drink from a spectator, then uses the interruption to mock the town's stingy ale prices. These unscripted moments created electric intimacy, reminding viewers they weren't just watching a story but helping to tell it. The technique was so effective that modern improv troupes still use similar audience prompts today. What's often overlooked is how these techniques build community. When an actor's exaggerated wink included everyone in a joke, or when the whole crowd shouted warnings to a naive character, the performance became a shared ritual. Unlike today's passive streaming, medieval theater demanded participation. Your laughter fueled the clown's antics, your gasps heightened the tragedy. This energy loop between stage and stands is why live theater still thrills us, even in our digital age. Now, imagine these vivid performances gaining an extra dimension, not through scenery or special effects, but through a force even more powerful: music. From thundering drumbeats that mimicked approaching armies to lutes strumming lovers' themes, sound wasn't just accompaniment, it was the invisible wire that pulled every emotion taut. Music pulsed through these traveling performances like a second heartbeat, not mere decoration, but a living force that could conjure storms, whisper secrets, or make an entire crowd sway in unison. Picture the scene. As actors prepared their makeshift stage, a minstrel would strike up a rhythmic pattern on a tabor drum, cutting through the market square chatter like a beacon. That drumbeat wasn't just a signal to gather, it was the first thread of the story's fabric. A lute's plucked strings might mimic a lover's racing heart, while a shawm's reedy wail could summon the eerie presence of a ghost long before the actor appeared. These sounds weren't accompaniment, they were invisible characters, shaping emotions too subtle for words. The cleverest troupes used music as their universal translator. In regions where dialects changed every few miles, a familiar tune could bridge gaps instantly. A ballad about a legendary knight might open with the same melody across France, Germany, and Italy, letting audiences grasp the story's framework even if the lyrics shifted. Songs became mnemonic devices, two catchy refrains summarizing key plot points so villagers could retell the tale accurately long after the wagons rolled away. Imagine a comic scene where a miser hoards gold, underscored by a minstrel singing, "Clink, clink, the coins all sink," a lyric so sticky it became local shorthand for greed. Instruments themselves were masterful manipulators of mood. A sudden shift from cheerful pipe music to dissonant drone strings signaled betrayal before the traitor even stepped forward. Drums played at double time ratcheted up battle scenes, their tempo syncing with the audience's pounding pulses. The most haunting effects came from simple tools: a metal sheet shaken to mimic thunder, or a whistle blown into a jug to create the moans of the damned. These tricks were so potent that church records complain of parishioners covering their ears during plays, convinced the devil's own orchestra was performing. Vocal music added yet another layer. Unlike modern musicals where songs advance the plot, medieval performers used them as punctuation, a chorus of villagers mocking the hero's failure, or a solo lament that let the audience process tragedy before the action resumed. Some troupes employed call and response techniques, teaching crowds a simple refrain to sing between scenes. This turned passive watchers into participants, their voices literally weaving themselves into the story. A surviving script from Burgundy shows how a song about spring's arrival was repurposed during plague years, with new lyrics about resilience transforming it into a communal anthem of hope. The magic of this musical alchemy lay in its flexibility. A troupe entering a region with strong folk traditions might swap their usual harp for local bagpipes, or adapt a romantic duet into the area's courtship dance rhythm. This adaptability didn't just please crowds, it disarmed critics. When authorities in York banned political plays in 1491, a clever troupe bypassed the rule by setting their satire to a hymn tune, arguing they were merely enhancing worship. The bishop, torn between outrage at the lyrics and admiration for the musical craftsmanship, reluctantly let them proceed. What's extraordinary is how these techniques foreshadowed modern storytelling. The way a leitmotif, a recurring musical phrase tied to a character, telegraphed a villain's entrance mirrors how film scores use themes today, those call and response songs. They're the ancestors of stadium rock anthems and tick-tock duets. Even the use of dissonance to unsettle listeners predates horror movie soundtracks by half a millennium. The medieval stage proved that music isn't just decoration for drama. It's the glue that binds an audience's hearts to the story. And just as melodies crossed borders effortlessly, so too did the performers themselves, adapting not only their instruments but their very words to charm polyglot crowds. From the Swiss Alps, where a single play might weave French, German, and Italian into one seamless spectacle, to Baltic ports where actors mimed when languages failed, these troupes turned Europe's Babel of tongues into their greatest creative advantage. Language was both a hurdle and a superpower for medieval traveling troupes. Imagine actors rolling into a town where the locals spoke a dialect so thick it might as well have been another tongue. The smartest performers didn't just overcome these barriers, they weaponized them. A troupe entering the multilingual markets of 15th century Strasbourg might open with a comic bit about language itself. An actor bungling Flemish greetings to riotous laughter, then seamlessly switching to flawless French for the merchant elite in the crowd. This wasn't just crowd-pleasing, it was social alchemy, turning Europe's Babel of tongues into a unifying joke everyone could share. Latin served as their secret key to elite circles. Church-sanctioned mystery plays often used the language's solemn rhythms for biblical scenes, lending authority to performances in cathedral squares. But the same troupe might pivot to gutter German or earthy Italian dialects for tavern after shows, where Judas' betrayal became a bawdy tale of a drunkard swindled at dice. This linguistic code switching wasn't merely practical, it was subversive. When a French actor playing a corrupt bishop delivered his Latin prayers with exaggerated solemnity, the educated clergy heard orthodox piety, while peasants catching the vulgar gestures understood the satire. The real stars were the bilingual actors, human Rosetta Stones who could spin a single story for multiple audiences. Records from Catalan troupes show performers fluent in Occitan, Castilian, and Basque, a trifecta that let them tweak scripts on the fly. A romantic ballad might emphasize chivalric themes for noble patrons, then shift to raunchy double entendres for the apprentices loitering at the back. Some even developed bridge dialects, blending languages into a pidgin that coastal traders and farmers alike could grasp. The famed performer Hans Sachs described how adding just a few Italian loanwords to his German routines made him a sensation in alpine villages, where cross-border trade had primed ears for hybrid speech. Dialects became storytelling tools in their own right. A villain might speak in the guttural tones of a rival region's accent, while heroes used the local vernacular like a melodic refrain. In border zones like Alsace or Flanders, troops deliberately layered languages within scenes. A lover's quarrel where she shouted in French and he pleaded in German became both comedy and commentary on divided lands. This linguistic play wasn't just entertaining, it taught audiences to navigate the polyglot realities of medieval life. A merchant watching such a performance might realize his Flemish customer understood more French than he'd assumed, leading to a smoother deal the next day. The impact rippled far beyond the stage. When troops borrowed folk sayings or regional jokes, they inadvertently preserved linguistic quirks otherwise lost to time. A comic bit mocking a Swiss cheesemaker's distinctive greeting in a 1520 script now serves as the earliest record of that dialect's syntax. Even mispronunciations had staying power. Scholars trace the spread of certain Italian loanwords into German to their repeated use and butchering by traveling actors. Like linguistic pollinators, these performers carried phrases across borders where they took root in local speech, but the true testament to their skill lies in the silences they navigated. In areas where language failed entirely, say, a Hungarian troupe performing for Danish fishermen actors leaned into universal physical comedy. A mime sequence about a clumsy thief could have crowds from Lisbon to Riga clutching their sides, proving laughter needed no translation. This visual storytelling seeped into local traditions too. Finnish midsummer plays still feature wordless clowns descended from medieval mimes, while Spanish puppetry preserves the exaggerated gestures troops used to transcend language barriers. What began as survival tactic became artistic revolution. By weaving together Latin's grandeur, dialect's warmth, and pantomime's clarity, these performers created a theatrical lingua franca that bound fragmented communities together. And as we'll see next, this linguistic alchemy didn't just entertain, it reshaped the very folklore that defined medieval Europe's cultural identity, turning traveling stages into crucibles where old tales were remade for every tongue and town. These traveling stages didn't just borrow from folklore, they became the cauldrons where old stories simmered into new forms. Picture a troupe arriving in a Scottish village with a well-worn script about a knight battling a dragon, only to hear locals whisper of their own legend, a waterhorse luring travelers to doom. By nightfall, the actors had woven the creature into their tale, its scales glistening with borrowed details from the villagers' memories. This wasn't cultural theft, it was alchemy. Every performance absorbed local flavor like bread soaking up broth, ensuring myths survived not as museum pieces, but as living narratives reshaped by each audience's breath. The feedback loop between stage and storyteller transformed both. In Bavaria, a 12th century play about a trickster fox borrowed so heavily from farmers' anecdotes that within decades, those same farmers began recounting the fox's exploits as if they'd witnessed them firsthand. Actors became unwitting ethnographers, collecting fragments of oral tradition, a witch's rhyme here, a ghostly omen there, and stitching them into scripts that carried these fragments across borders. A Norwegian folktale about a selkie might surface in a German morality play as a metaphor for lost souls, then circle back to Scandinavia with newfound philosophical weight, altering the original legend forever. Festivals still bear the fingerprints of this exchange. The Catalan Potom Festival's dancing devils, Their exaggerated masks and chaotic choreography descend directly from medieval actors portraying Hellmouth scenes. In England's Mummers plays, where St. George still duels seasonal spirits, the dialogue mirrors the same rhyming couplets used by traveling troops to help illiterate crowds memorize plots. Even the jack-o'-lantern's grinning face traces back to turnip-carved props troops used to represent wandering spirits, a pagan symbol repurposed for Christian morality tales, then reclaimed by folk tradition. What's often overlooked is how these performances standardized regional lore. Before mass printing, a story might splinter into dozens of local variants. Was the haunted mill's ghost a betrayed wife or a murdered merchant? Traveling plays acted as cultural filters, popularizing certain versions until they became canon. The Brothers Grimm later collected many folk tales that were actually solidified by medieval scripts, their darker edges sanded down by generations of theatrical adaptation. That's why German and French versions of Red Riding Hood share suspiciously similar dialogue. It's not organic tradition, but the residue of well-toured performances. Yet the deepest legacy lies in performance itself, the way an Irish cinch dramatically pauses before a ghost story's climax mirrors an actor's timed reveal of a corpse under a sheet. Italian cantastory street singers still use the same hand-painted scrolls that traveling troops unfurled to illustrate songs 600 years ago. These weren't mere borrowings, they proved that storytelling is an embodied art, a truth medieval performers understood when they turned folktales into shared physical experiences rather than passive recitations. This symbiotic relationship between theater and oral tradition faced its greatest threat not from changing tastes, but from a revolution in technology, one that would trap stories on static pages rather than letting them evolve nightly under the stars. The printing press didn't just compete with traveling troops, it fundamentally altered how societies remembered, reshaping Europe's cultural landscape in ways both miraculous and, for the performers who once animated it, irreversibly devastating. The golden age of traveling theaters began to dim as Europe stepped into the late Renaissance, not with a dramatic collapse but with a slow fading like lanterns guttering out one by one along a darkened road. Cities swollen with new wealth and ambition built permanent playhouses that lured audiences with lavish sets and stable rosters of star actors. Why brave the mud and chaos of a market square performance when you could sit comfortably in London's Globe or Madrid's Corral de Comedia, sipping wine as professional crews orchestrated thunderous special effects overhead? These brick and timber temples of drama offered something itinerant troops couldn't: consistency. No more waiting years for your favorite actors to circle back through your village. Now you could see them weekly, their artistry honed by repetition rather than the frantic improvisation of the road. Printing presses delivered another blow, transforming how stories traveled. Where once a troop's wagon carried the only version of a scandalous royal romance or a cautionary fable, now cheap pamphlets and playbooks spread identical tales to every literate household. A satire that might have drawn crowds for months could be reduced to yesterday's news by a broadsheet nailed to a tavern door. Some troops fought back by selling chapbooks of their own, abridged scripts with margin notes suggesting where to gasp or cheer, but they were swimming against the tide. The magic of live performance couldn't compete with the novelty of holding a story in your hands to revisit whenever you pleased. Urbanization tightened the noose further. As feudal villages gave way to crowded cities, the open spaces where troops once performed vanished behind shopfronts and tenements. Magistrates, anxious about disorderly gatherings, demanded expensive permits or confined performances to designated yards, often charging fees that erased a troop's slim profits. Meanwhile, the same roads that had carried actors between towns now carried stricter edicts from centralized governments. censorship grew more sophisticated, with approved scripts stamped by royal officials and unauthorized performances punished by brandings or worse. A comic bit that might have earned applause in 1480 could land an actor in the stocks by 1620, yet these performers were nothing if not adaptable. Many troupes pivoted to stationary life, merging with permanent companies or becoming the resident entertainers at noble estates. The same actors who once improvised in the rain now rehearsed meticulously under candlelight, trading spontaneity for precision. Others found niches the new system couldn't fill, bringing abbreviated performances to prisons, mining towns, or army camps where books and playhouses remained out of reach. A few stubborn holdouts became specialists in nostalgia, marketing themselves as relics of a vanishing tradition. Records show one German troupe in 1650 advertising the old manner of playing as in grandsire's day, their patched costumes now part of the show. The true loss wasn't just a mode of performance, but a way of thinking about stories. Traveling theaters had treated narratives as living things, reshaped by each audience's reactions and the latest gossip from the road. Printed plays fossilized them, staged productions polished them to a predictable sheen. The chaotic creativity of the wagon stages, where a heckler's shout might rewrite a scene, or a local scandal could warp a plot by sundown, gave way to scripts that prized uniformity. Audiences gained spectacle but lost agency, becoming watchers rather than participants in the storytelling ritual. Historians piecing together this transition face a puzzle as elusive as the performers themselves. Unlike cathedral builders or court painters, traveling troupes left few permanent traces. Their scripts were memorized or scribbled on perishable scraps, their costumes repurposed until they unraveled. What survives comes filtered through the biases of those who documented them. Church ledgers condemning their morals, municipal records fining them for disorder, or the occasional diary entry from a nobleman amused by their antics. Even their plays, when written down, often lack the stage directions and marginalia that would reveal how they truly came to life. To understand these performers, scholars must read between the lines, like deciphering laughter from the silence between musical notes. Uncovering the full story of medieval traveling theaters is like trying to reconstruct a shadow. The harder you look, the more it slips away. Unlike stone cathedrals or illuminated manuscripts, these ephemeral performances left behind few tangible traces. What survives comes to us in fragments and whispers, a line item in a church ledger recording payment for players at Lamestide, a court document fining a troupe for disturbing the peace with lewd gestures, or a traveler's diary marveling at actors who made the very air tremble with their art. These scattered clues force historians to become detectives, reading between the lines of dry administrative records to hear echoes of long-vanished applause. Archaeology offers tantalizing glimpses beneath the soil. Excavations at medieval fairgrounds have yielded corroded coins bearing tooth marks, perhaps tossed by enthusiastic spectators who held them clenched in their teeth while clapping. In York, archaeologists uncovered a 15th-century playbill stuck in a latrine, its faded ink still boasting of marvels and mirth most wondrous. Costume fragments tell their own stories. A shred of silk dyed with expensive kerms red suggests noble patronage, while a leather mask recovered from a German dig site shows careful repair stitches, evidence of an actor's devotion to his craft. Even the humble hazelnut shells found clustered around former performance sites speak volumes, the medieval equivalent of popcorn littering a modern theater floor. The greatest challenge lies in reconstructing performances themselves. Few full scripts survive from traveling troupes. Most relied on memorized scenarios or improvised around loose frameworks. What we have often comes filtered through church or noble scribes who transcribed plays for approval, smoothing out the rough edges that made them vital. A script marked fit for performance in a bishop's archive likely lacked the subversive ad-libs that brought crowds roaring to their feet. Scholars must read these sanitized versions against grain, imagining where an actor might have winked or how a particular line could be delivered with double meaning. Modern technology is breathing new life into these cold cases. Spectral imaging has revealed erased marginal notes in account books, hints of payments to actors that someone later tried to conceal. Digital reconstructions of acoustics in medieval squares show how a skilled performer could project to thousands without amplification, while analysis of pigment traces on crumbling playbills suggests how vividly stages were decorated. Even the chemistry of surviving makeup residues tells a story. Lead-based white face paint found on Italian excavation sites matches descriptions of commedia dell'arte actors, their ghostly visages visible by torchlight. What emerges from this detective work is a paradox: the very troops that seemed omnipresent in medieval life left behind the faintest of footprints. Their legacy survives not in parchment but in cultural DNA. The way a folk festival's clown still mirrors a 15th century jester's gait, or how political cartoons use visual shorthand perfected by wagon stage satirists. This absence reminds us how much history remains unwritten, waiting in attics and archaeological layers for the right sleuth to piece it together. Now, a new generation of performers and scholars are attempting the impossible, bringing these vanished spectacles back to life. From open-air festivals in Bavaria to experimental theater troupes in Prague, modern recreations walk a tightrope between historical accuracy and the irrecoverable spark of improvisation that made medieval theater so electric. Can today's actors truly channel the raw urgency of performers who blended news, gossip, and art into a single combustible mix? The answer lies somewhere between meticulous research and the unscriptable magic that happens when live performers and audiences collide under an open sky. Modern festivals brim with velvet-clad jesters and wooden wagon stages, offering a tantalizing glimpse of medieval theater. But peel back the curtain, and the authenticity debate gets as lively as a troupe's sparring match. Take the annual Kaltenberg Nights tournament in Germany, where scholars and performers clash not with swords but over linen versus wool tunics, or whether applewood masks truly replicate the ones described in 14th century ledgers. Some troupes, like England's Past Pleasures, spend years hand-stitching costumes using medieval dyes and stitches, only to face criticism for actors wearing modern eyeglasses offstage. Meanwhile, at the Maryland Renaissance Festival, you'll find pirates and fairies mingling with historically accurate minstrels, a mashup that purists scoff at but crowds adore. This tension between education and entertainment reveals just how slippery reconstructing the past can be. The devil's in the dialects. While modern reenactors might nail the look of a 15th century burgher, nailing the speech is another matter. Scholars at the University of Vienna painstakingly reconstructed Middle High German pronunciation for a staged Nibelungenlied, only to discover contemporary audiences couldn't understand a word. Now, most troupes compromise using modernized language but keeping period idioms. When an actor shouts by St. Fiacre's bunions instead of "Oh my God," it preserves the flavor without losing the crowd, explains historical linguist Dr. Elsbeth Wagner. Even gestures get scrutinized. Manuscript illustrations show actors holding their palms upward to denote sorrow, a subtlety lost until recent rediscovery by theater historians. Then there's the elephant on the stage: women's roles. While modern festivals freely cast women as knights and nobles, medieval troupes outside Italy were all male. Some experimental groups like France's Theatre des Origines adhere strictly to this, prompting protests about erasing female performers. Others argue that historical accuracy shouldn't override inclusivity. If we only did what was authentic, we'd also have to exclude anyone with dental fillings. Quip's performer Marcus Leland, whose all-gender troupe performs Shakespeare with original pronunciation but diverse casting. The biggest gap might be the audience itself. Medieval crowds weren't polite theatergoers, they shouted advice to characters, threw rotten fruit at villains, and demanded encores of favorite scenes. Modern attempts to replicate this chaos often falter. When the Bristol Old Vic encouraged heckling during a mystery play revival, reviewers called it gimmicky. Yet some innovations bridge the centuries better than expected. The Dutch troupe theatre Kwast livestreams interactive performances where viewers vote on plot twists via app, a digital twist on the communal storytelling that once had villagers deciding if the miser should repent or burn. What these recreations capture best, though, is the essential alchemy of medieval theatre, its ability to turn a patch of grass into a kingdom and a shared story into social glue. Whether a meticulously researched passion play in Obermagau or a fanciful joust at a stateside Ren fair, these events keep alive the central truth that live performance, no matter the era, thrives on the electric exchange between those on the stage and those beyond the footlights. And in an age where screens dominate our attention, that human connection might be the most authentic revival of all. So why does this centuries-old tradition resonate now more than ever? As we'll see next, the answer lies not in the past, but in how medieval theatre's raw, participatory spirit offers an antidote to our increasingly isolated digital lives, proving that some needs, community, catharsis, a good story well told are timeless. Medieval traveling theaters might seem like relics of a distant past, but their ghost lights still flicker in today's media circus. Consider how quickly misinformation spreads now, false claims ricocheting across platforms, algorithms amplifying outrage, deepfakes blurring reality. Now imagine that same chaos, but without fact-checkers or retweet buttons, where the only sources of breaking news were actors in motley spinning tales from the back of a wagon. The parallels are startling. Both eras grapple with the same core dilemma. How do you make truth as compelling as fiction? How do you hold attention without sacrificing accuracy? These performers were the original viral storytellers, turning dry facts into gripping narratives, sometimes with embellishments that stuck harder than the facts themselves. Take the way medieval troops adapted stories for different audiences, softening a king's defeat into a heroic last stand for towns loyal to him, or sharpening it into a parable of arrogance for his rivals. Doesn't that sound eerily like modern media bubbles, where the same event gets spun into entirely different narratives for different demographics? The actors weren't just entertainers, they were early architects of what we'd now call engagement, measuring success by gasps and coin tosses rather than clicks and shares. Their survival depended on reading crowds as deftly as today's influencers read analytics dashboards. Yet there's a crucial difference. While modern algorithms trap us in echo chambers, medieval theaters forced confrontation with opposing views. A troupe arriving in a divided town couldn't perform two versions of the same play. They had to craft a story that resonated with both sides, threading the needle between truth and tact. This demanded a nuance we've lost, the ability to hold multiple perspectives in tension without reducing everything to binary battles. Their stages became rare spaces where conflicting truths could coexist, if only for the duration of a performance. The deeper lesson lies in how these troupes wielded accountability. Unlike faceless Twitter bots or anonymous Telegram channels, medieval actors stood literally in the spotlight. If they spread outright lies, they faced torches and pitchforks, sometimes literally. Their credibility wasn't just professional, it was physical. Today, when misinformation can be launched from behind a dozen proxies, there's something refreshing about that directness. Perhaps that's why live journalism, think town halls or unedited press conferences still carries weight even in our digital age. The human presence, the unscriptable moment, the chance to shout a question and demand an answer, these are the last echoes of the marketplace stages. What's most enduring is their understanding of story as a shared ritual. Modern media often isolates us, scrolling alone, reacting in silos, but medieval performances required collective participation. The laughter that rolled through the crowd, the gasps that rose in unison, the way a single actor's pause could make hundreds lean forward as one. In an era of fragmented attention spans, their greatest power was making information feel communal rather than consumable. That's why the best podcasts, YouTube creators, and even Substack writers today mimic that intimacy. They're not just sharing news, they're hosting a digital campfire where facts become experiences. The traveling theaters of Europe didn't just entertain medieval villagers. They built the blueprint for how societies process truth, gossip, and power, a blueprint we're still tracing today, whether we realize it or not. Their legacy whispers a challenge across the centuries. Information will always be a performance. The question is whether we, like those crowds in the town square, can stay sharp enough to separate the revelatory from the merely sensational. After all, the stakes are higher now. Today's wagons are global platforms, and the coins being tossed aren't just copper. They're our attention, our votes, our shared reality. There's a reason the image of a traveling troupe rolling into town still tugs at our imagination centuries later. It represents something primal about how humans connect. That moment when the first trumpet blast cuts through the chatter, when strangers elbow together in anticipation, when the flickering torchlight reveals actors transforming into kings or fools, it's more than entertainment. It's ritual. We see echoes of this magic in modern fan conventions, where cosplayers and attendees collectively breathe life into fictional worlds, or in flash mobs that turn subway platforms into impromptu stages. The bones of the experience remain unchanged. The shared suspension of disbelief, the thrill of the unexpected, the unspoken pact between performer and audience to pretend together. What's fascinating is how this allure crosses cultural boundaries. Japan's kabuki theater began with wandering troupes of female performers in the 17th century, later banned, then reborn with all-male casts, yet retained that same raw energy of temporary stages erected in rice fields. In India, Yakshagana troupes still travel between villages with elaborate makeup and booming drums. Their all-night performances blurring the line between myth and reality, just as medieval morality plays once did. Even American cowboy poetry gatherings, where ranchers spin tales under the stars, tap into that ancient longing for stories delivered not through screens, but by living voices riding the night air. Film and literature can't resist romanticizing these performers either. From Shakespeare in Love's cheeky portrayal of Elizabethan actors to the Grand Budapest Hotel's fictional play, The Boy with Apple, which becomes a plot device across generations, storytellers keep returning to the trope of the traveling show as a catalyst for change. Hayao Miyazaki's Howl's Moving Castle features a wizard's wagon that's essentially a floating theater, while fantasy novels like The Night Circus imagine performances so immersive they become alternate realities. These fictional depictions aren't just nostalgia, they're proof that the wandering troupe remains one of our most potent metaphors for transformation. But to truly understand why this image endures, we turn to Dr. Eleanor Graves, a Cambridge historian who spent a decade tracing the footsteps of medieval performers. What we're really captivated by, she explains, is the paradox they represent. They were outsiders who became temporary insiders, strangers who voiced a community's deepest fears and desires. A troupe might arrive not knowing the local miller had been cheating customers, yet by nightfall, their stock greedy baker character would bear an uncanny resemblance to him. That alchemy of reflecting hidden truths back at people is as magnetic now as it was then. Graves points to a surprising modern parallel: viral TikTok creators. Think about how a trending audio clip gets adapted by thousands of users, each adding their own spin. That's essentially what traveling troupes did with popular plots, reworking the cheating wife farce or the brave orphan tale to fit local context. The framework stayed familiar, but the details shifted to keep it relevant. This adaptability made the theater a mirror rather than just an escape, allowing communities to see their struggles reframed as universal stories. Perhaps the most enduring legacy lies in how these performances blurred the line between art and life. When a medieval actor playing a corrupt judge got booed, the reaction wasn't just about the story, it was a safe way to protest real injustices. Today's immersive theater experiences, like Sleep No More or Secret Cinema, chase that same visceral collision of fiction and reality. Even political protests borrow from this playbook. Activists donning Guy Fawkes masks or performing satirical skits outside courthouses are channeling the same spirit as those wagon stage satirists who knew laughter could be revolutionary. The next time you see buskers turning a street corner into a stage, or catch yourself drawn into a crowd watching some unexpected performance, you're participating in a tradition as old as cobblestones and candlelight. Those medieval audiences leaning forward in the firelight, they're not so different from us, still hungry for stories that make the world feel smaller, stranger, and more connected, if only for the length of a play. Dr. Elena Hart leans over a weathered manuscript in a Cambridge office, tracing a finger along marginalia left by some long-dead scribe. "What fascinates me," she says, her voice sharpening with the thrill of discovery, is how these actors functioned as Europe's nervous system, carrying not just news, but entire worldviews from port cities to mountain hamlets. Her research reveals an unexpected pattern. Traveling troupes deliberately cast actors from diverse regions, creating human tapestries that could resonate across linguistic and cultural borders. A Bavarian clown's physical comedy might soften a French crowd, while a Venetian tragedian's operatic delivery could move a Flemish audience to tears. This wasn't just practical, it was philosophical. By embodying difference onstage, they normalized it offstage. Hart's work dismantles the romantic myth of troupes as mere rebels thumbing noses at authority. They weren't anarchists, she insists, pulling a 15th century guild ledger from her shelf. "Look here, this Cologne troupe paid extra for a licensed playwright to sanitize their scripts before performing near bishoprics." They understood the game. Her analysis of censorship records shows most troupes operated in a careful dance with power, pushing boundaries just enough to thrill audiences, but rarely enough to get banned. A surviving prompt book from Ghent contains 3 versions of the same scene, one for conservative towns, one for liberal cities, and a third marked "only if patron present," with jokes tailored to local nobles. The true revelation in Hart's studies lies in the economic data. By cross-referencing performance routes with tax records, she's proven that towns hosting regular theater saw measurable increases in trade. It wasn't just the coins tossed to actors, she explains. Merchants followed the crowds. A popular play could turn a sleepy market town into a regional hub for weeks. Her maps show how certain troupes deliberately aligned their routes with wool fairs or wine harvests, becoming de facto economic stimulants. One contract from 1482 even stipulates that a troupe must perform near a Burgundian vineyard during the grape crush. their audience is thirsty for both drama and drink. But Hart's most provocative claim centers on religion. "We've got it backward," she argues, displaying a recently deciphered letter from a Spanish abbot. The church didn't merely tolerate theater as a teaching tool, they feared its power and tried to co-opt it. Her translation reveals clerics complaining that parishioners remembered plays better than sermons, quoting stage devils more readily than scripture. In response, some monasteries formed their own troupes, with monks performing approved biblical stories so vividly that a note from Avignon warns against overmuch realism in the flagellation scenes. This spiritual arms race between rogue actors and ecclesiastical impresarios ultimately enriched both traditions, leaving echoes in everything from box passions to modern Christmas pageants. What emerges from Hart's research is a radical reimagining of these performers. They weren't just the period's journalists or satirists, but something far more profound: Europe's first mass-scale cognitive architects. The stories they chose to amplify, the villains they made laughable, the heroes they rendered flawed, all subtly shaped how entire generations processed war, faith, and justice. When a troupe in 1397 turned a failed peasant revolt into a tragic romance, Hart notes, they didn't just report history, they taught people how to feel about it. That emotional curriculum, written in vanishing ink across 1,000 makeshift stages, may be their most enduring and invisible legacy. As our journey through these wandering storytellers' world concludes, consider how their essence survives wherever people gather to share stories face to face, from podcasters building intimate communities to TikTok creators sparking global trends with nothing but a phone and a spark of genius. The technology dazzles, but the human impulse remains unchanged: to see our lives reflected, distorted, and ultimately understood through the alchemy of performance. The medieval stages may have folded, but the conversations they started still whisper through every piece of media we consume today. Perhaps the highest compliment we can pay those long-vanished actors is this: 7 centuries later, we're still leaning forward in the dark, waiting for the next scene to begin. From the flickering torchlight of medieval market squares to the glowing screens of today, the legacy of traveling theaters pulses through how we share stories and challenge power. These roving performers didn't just entertain, they forged a blueprint for public discourse that still shapes our world. Think about the last viral video that made you laugh while skewering a politician, or the podcast that wrapped complex news into gripping narratives. That's the same alchemy those actors mastered centuries ago: truth disguised as spectacle, wisdom smuggled in with wit. The tools have upgraded from wooden wagons to wireless networks, but the core remains unchanged: the human craving for stories that inform and transform. What's astonishing is how thoroughly these troupes anticipated modern media's strengths and pitfalls. Their struggle to balance authenticity with audience appeal mirrors today's debates over clickbait versus journalism. Their knack for tailoring messages to different crowds foreshadowed algorithmic personalization. Even their occasional embellishments, turning a skirmish into an epic battle, find echoes in today's sensationalized headlines. Yet they operated with an accountability we've lost. A performer who lied too boldly might face an angry mob, not just ratioed comments. That visceral connection between creator and crowd kept the worst excesses in check, a lesson worth remembering in our age of detached digital virality. The real magic lay in how they turned passive listeners into active participants. Unlike today's one-way media deluge, these performances demanded engagement. Crowds shouted advice to characters, debated plot twists at intermission, carried themes home like embers to spark tavern conversations. Modern creators chasing community building are rediscovering this ancient truth. People don't just want to consume stories, they want to live inside them to shape their outcomes. From Twitch streamers reacting to live chats to immersive theater blurring stage and audience lines, we're relearning what those medieval troops knew instinctively. So the next time you share a meme that critiques authority, or lose yourself in a documentary that makes history feel urgent, you're walking paths those traveling players carved. Their spirit thrives wherever stories leap off the page or screen and into our collective imagination. If this journey through their world has sparked your curiosity, keep the conversation alive. Drop a comment about where you see their influence today, or which modern storytellers carry that torch. And if you'd love more deep dives into history's hidden game changers, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss what's coming next. After all, every like and share is your way of tossing coins to today's digital troubadours, keeping the oldest form of connection alive, the simple, enduring power of a story well told.